Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about how to play a Protection Paladin in Dragonflight Season 2. Prot Pally has been riding high late in Season 1 of Dragonflight, with everyone in the world singing their praises. I've written some articles on Wowhead recently, along with the rest of the class guide writers, about why you should or shouldn't play a given spec, and all of the tank guide writers agreed Prot Pally is one of the main reasons you shouldn't play the other 5 tank specs. People complain about this in the comment section because that's what a Wowhead comment section is for, but I can honestly say we're correct. I know these other guide writers, they're my friends, and Pally is strong enough that we are all very seriously considering playing it in the coming raid tier. I would also add that Pally's really fun, and so this isn't like some awful screeching complaint that I think any of us are really putting out there either. I certainly am not dreading the possibility of playing Prot Pally. I like playing Prot Pally. It's insanely strong and insanely fun. And just to go off script here, if I had to do like a tier ranking of most fun tanks, I would put Prot Pally number 1. Yeah, I think right now for me, mentally, Prot Pally number 1. Weirdly, I would put Bear Druid number 2, Monk, then Warrior, and then Vengeance Demon Hunter and Blood DK last. There you go, free bit of extra content. Fun tier list right in there along with everything else. Now, Pally has gotten one round of nerfs recently, and this was not enough to knock it out of the number 1 spot. It basically amounted to about 3% less health and armor, so maybe 4 to 5% less effective health against physical damage. Now, anecdotally, whatever, but doing Mythic Vault over the last several weeks on my Pally in the run-up to this upcoming raid, I was never close to dying on basically any of the difficult fights. You know, Mythic Razageth literally killed it on the first pull on the Paladin. I don't think I ever went below half health. I certainly wasn't in any situation where a 3% nerf to health and armor would have any impact at all. In any of other difficult spots in some of the fights, the second phase of Brood Keeper, pretty challenging section of the fight on Warrior and Monk. On Pally, literally just bubble one of the tank slams, just spell ward another one, cooldowns through the third one, bubbles back up for the fourth. That sort of thing. It's just not that hard to play a Pally compared to the other tanks for dealing with a lot of the tank mechanics that you have to accommodate for in raids. There was also a 33% nerf to Righteous Protector. That's the talent that makes it so that when you spend Holy Power, you reduce the remaining cooldown of Avenging Wrath and Guardian of Ancient Kings. It went from 3 seconds every time to 2 seconds every time. 33%. This sounded really bad to a lot of players, and I mean, it's a noticeable nerf, but in terms of actual numbers, it's about 10 to 12 more seconds added to your average wings cooldown, so like 75 seconds instead of around a minute, or maybe 80 seconds instead of around 70, depending on haste and procs and so on, and 30 to 35 seconds onto your average Guardian of Ancient Kings cooldown. It's not that bad. Certainly not enough to impact tank balance overall. A surprisingly small set of nerfs for Prot Pally given how strong they were at the time. And finally, just to be thorough, there was a small nerf to, or actually somewhat of a large nerf to Sentinel, the really powerful Avenging Wrath overriding talent. They reduced the health increase that it gives you by 50%, but then they still kept the damage reduction effect, which is the more important of the 2 components that Sentinel gives you. They kept that completely unaltered. So in terms of how Prot Pally plays, it's a tank with really powerful offensive and defensive cooldowns, and really high uptime on those cooldowns. Sentinel, which I just mentioned, is a talent that replaces Avenging Wrath, still gives you the damage components of the Wings buff, but also makes it into a major damage reduction and health pool increasing cooldown. Like I said, the cooldown uptime was reduced a little bit recently, but it's still very strong. We're talking, it was in the 55% uptime range before, maybe creeping into 60% with new gear values as we get into this next tier. Now it'll probably be more like 45% going into the next tier, and then maybe creeping up to 50%. So right back where it was before as we get fully geared in this next tier and next season. It gives you 15% extra health and 30% extra damage reduction and slowly decays throughout its duration. With the right talent setup, you can maintain Sentinel for over 30 seconds a cast, and, with an average cooldown of around 70 to 75 seconds, that means you can maintain over 40% uptime on just a wildly powerful cooldown. And when it's down, you have several other really powerful defensive cooldowns that you can use to fill the gaps. We're talking Eye of Tyr on pretty high uptime, which now deals a lot of damage if you're running, I believe the talent's name is Inmost Light. Ardent Defender, Guardian of Ancient Kings, Divine Shield. Great stuff all around. In terms of what Pally's good at, they have a lot of damage in AoE now, thanks to a barrage of talents that support Avenger Shield. They're tanky in AoE, thanks to Bulwark of Order, which converts a lot of that damage directly into self-shielding. This makes Pally's really powerful at locking down caster mobs as well. They have a pretty short average cooldown on Avenger Shield, which is a blanket silence. And, that really lets Pally's cover up a lot of mistakes in Mythic Plus groups when it comes to interrupting. Or even not, forget about mistakes, it just lets you run comps where other people don't really have to do that much interrupting. That's really good. Thanks to all of their AoE-oriented powers, Pally's are great tanks in Mythic Plus. I think it would be hard to find anybody who's serious who would disagree about the state of Pally in Mythic Plus. They're the best in the game. With the changes to affixes in Season 2, I think their ability to spam interrupts is going to make them even stronger than other tanks for dealing with the incorporeal affix. In terms of dealing with the entangling affix, they have talents that let them not only remove that root from themselves, but somebody else as well, just sort of freely. And in dealing with the new afflicted affix, they're a tank that's capable of dispelling the ads and helping the healer out on that affix. So, along with Monk, they're one of the two tanks that are capable of basically countering all three of the new affixes that are being added to the game. While they basically perform the same when it comes to Afflicted. A Dispel is a Dispel. In terms of dealing with Incorporeal, Pally, I think, is quite a bit better, and in terms of dealing with Entangling, Paladin is clearly better. Paladin's a class that has good damage mitigation, good cooldowns, high uptime on their cooldowns, good damage output, and tons of group utility. The two weaknesses Paladin has are mobility, which really isn't that bad now that Divine Steed is off the global cooldown, and self-healing. Pally's self-healing isn't bad either, it's just a little unreliable. You get a free Word of Glory every 3 Shield of the Righteous casts, which is usually enough to keep yourself sustained, but you're not a Blood DK, or actually even a Brewmaster Monk. Those two classes have a lot of sustained self-healing, and Pally doesn't. You have powerful base damage mitigation, really good cooldowns, but you're mostly limited to clutch self-heals rather than a steady stream of self-healing. Paladin's tier bonuses are simple, and I think they're actually pretty good now. There's been a bit of complaining on the part of Pally mains. I think they're actually a little underrated. They weren't good at the start of the PTR. They were terrible, but they've been iterated upon, and I think they're actually a little undervalued now. The 2-piece bonus makes your Avenger Shield burn targets it hits with a debuff called Heartfire. It deals an extra 20% of the damage dealt as a 5-second dot. Basically just 20% more Avenger Shield damage. It also heals you for 100% of the damage that Heartfire deals. That is pretty good. That really does fix one of the biggest issues I think Pally has, which is just kind of sustained trickle of self-healing. The 4-piece bonus makes it so that your Judgment critical strikes also apply Heartfire, and they can trigger Grand Crusader. These are simple bonuses, and the 2-piece is whatever, it's a little, it's very passive and maybe a little boring, but I really think that trickle of self-healing is better than people are giving it credit for. The 4-piece was pretty underwhelming at first. The Grand Crusader proc chance was the same as the normal Grand Crusader proc chance, so 15%. So you would have to go, 20, 30, 40 seconds between Judgment critical strikes, and then, it would only be a 15% proc chance. So you might go 80, 90, 120 seconds between procs on that. I believe that has been bumped up to 50% base proc chance now, so you do get a decent number of Grand Crusader procs. Frankly, a Grand Crusader proc, even if it was guaranteed, isn't like that massive, but it does reset the cooldown or reduce the cooldown on Judgment, so it's actually pretty decent for your single target rotation to get the occasional Grand Crusader proc that you just got by casting Judgment. All in all, not bad, has a positive impact on your rotation, not really that huge or like certainly won't change the way that you spec or play all that much, I think. All right, now let's take a look at talents. And I'm in game here. I have 3 talent builds that I want to show off, a Mythic Plus build, a single target raid build, and an AoE build. Now, a single target is going to apply to the majority of the boss fights in Aberrus. We've only gotten to test 8. Obviously, we haven't gotten to test Mythic Sarkareth or any difficulty of Sarkareth yet. But we've gotten to test the other 8 on normal, heroic, and mythic. And what we can say about them is that they're basically all single target fights, with the exception of Assault of the Zakali, which is a very, very AoE heavy fight. It basically just feels like a trash pull. The other 7 fights are either exclusively single target, basically single target, or single target with a very little bit of ad cleave. That being said, Mythic Plus is the thing most people care about, so let's just start with Mythic Plus. This is a pretty standard Mythic Plus setup for Paladins. Just going over the left-hand tree, you'll notice that I haven't taken Cleanse Toxins in the default setup, and that's because most of the time you're not going to be dispelling. It's an option, though, I think, for Afflicted Weeks, for Brackenhide Hollow, for Underrot. You're definitely going to want to take Cleanse Toxins and help with Dispels. And the talent that I would drop in order to pick that up is Lightforged Blessing. This is a very small, kind of crappy amount of trickle healing. It'll be a couple million healing throughout the span of a full Mythic Plus run. It's not a bad talent, but you could drop this talent and take something else and never miss it. You could take Auras of Swift Vengeance if you're not the only Paladin in the group. Maybe you're playing with a Holy Paladin, and so they're going to be covering Devotion Aura. You could take Retribution Aura and give your party a lot more damage throughout the course of the run, and that would certainly be worth giving up Lightforged Blessing. Again, you could take Cleanse Toxins, that would be useful. You could also take Unbound Freedom for Entangling Weeks, and then you can cast Freedom on another member of the group, maybe, a priest in your group, somebody who's slow, and then you're still getting that Freedom on yourself. You can also just have the 30% move speed increase as well from Freedom, even if it's not Entangling Week. That's not bad for getting around. You could also just take something like Improved Blessing and Protection, give yourself a minute off of the cooldown of Bop and Spell Warding, which is nice. Or if you really wanted to maximize some damage, you could take Recompense, get a little bit of extra damage from that. Or if you're really into group utility, I think the highest level Mythic Plus pushers they really like Sacrifices of the Just. Being able to sacrifice on a 1-minute cooldown is frankly overpowered, and something that I think just completely gets glossed over by the majority of people who play Paladin, including myself. I forget about it all the time. It's insanely strong. I just knocked over my soda. Nothing was broken. In terms of the bottom part of the tree, this is something I just want to kind of lock in on here. This stays the same no matter what. Seal of Might and Seal of Alacrity are both really good talents. There are some other really good talents down here. Divine Purpose is an amazingly strong talent. But you have to pick up both of these to pat to this bottom set of branches of the tree. And all of the talents down here are stronger than anything up in the upper 75% of the tree. You have 2 choice nodes down here, Seal of Order or Fading Light. Seal of Order is better in 100% of situations. You basically get 10% more armor and 10% cooldown reduction on Judgment and Blessed Hammer. That is just simply better than 20% shielding from all the damage you deal with Judgment, Blessed Hammer, and Hammer of Wrath. Similarly, getting free Avenger shields after each Divine Toll, 3 of them, that's just better than getting 15 seconds off the cooldown of Divine Toll. I really like that cooldown reduction on Divine Toll. I would love to take this talent. But Divine Resonance is clearly better. It has synergy with all of the wonderful Avenger shield talents that you have over here, like Bulwark of Order, Tears Enforcer. It's, Gift of the Golden Valkyr, even. It's just a better talent in Mythic Plus and in single target. Over here in the right-hand tree, a lot of this stuff is pretty locked in, but there is some handful of talents that you can swap around. Now, like Sentinel, as an example, this is something I would take 100% of the time in Mythic Plus, and really for anything that's hard-hitting in Raid. But you can take Avenging Wrath, Might, if you're not worried about your defenses. You know, you're doing easy Mythic Plus, or doing an easy boss fight and you just want more damage. 20% more crit is going to add more damage than a bunch of defensive value. There's a lot of talents here like Sanctuary, which just adds, you know, steady defensive value, similar to taking Sentinel. Not a requirement if you're not worried about your defenses, but for Mythic Plus, I would be. Barricade of Faith is another example there. Really good defensive value. Yeah. Strength in Adversity is a really nice talent in AoE and in Mythic Plus. It basically gives you 10% parry whenever you cast Avenger's Shield. It just snapshots the last Avenger's Shield and gives you 2% parry for each target hit. Now, because you're hitting 5 targets with each Avenger's Shield thanks to Soaring Shield, this roughly averages out to be about 8 to 10% parry throughout the course of a run, which is huge. In non-AoE situations, it's not that great, 2 to 4% parry. And that's where Crusader's Resolve becomes a bit better of an option for like single target raid fights. You can stack, 4 to 6% damage reduction on your enemy target. That stacks nicely with the damage reduction that you're getting from Consecration to baseline, about 13 to 14% based off your mastery, and then another 5% from Sanctuary. Then all your damage reduction from damage reduction from Devotion Aura, damage reduction from Armor, damage reduction from Versatility. You get it. Tyr's Enforcer is, even in single target, a pretty decent source of damage output. Obviously much better in multi-target situations, but even in single target, it does tend to get run. The bottom third of this tree is really where a lot of the power that Pally has going for it is kind of allocated here. You have Gift of the Golden Valkyr, which you only put 1 point into, and this is kind of notable because you can see the second line here of this talent. When you drop below 30% health, you become infused with Guardian of Ancient Kings for 4 seconds. This cannot occur again for 45 seconds. That doesn't change with a second point. The first line, the cooldown reduction that you get for hitting enemies with Avenger Shield, cooldown reduction for Guardian of Ancient Kings, it's fine. It's really not that amazing. I mean, it's not bad. It does mean your main shield wall-ish cooldown is pretty short in Mythic Plus. But the second point just doesn't really give you enough value. And that second line is insanely strong. A low health reactive shield wall on a 45-second cooldown is crazy. Most other effects that would work like this would be 2 to 3 minutes. Down here we have Righteous Protector. This is a must-have in every situation. If you're playing Paladin at max level and you don't have this talented, you're screwing around. You're doing something wrong. For any sort of AoE, Bulwark of Righteous Fury just has wonderful synergy with all the things that cause you to Avenger Shield extra, Divine Resonance, Soaring Shield, Divine Toll, Strength in Adversity, Tyr's Enforcer, Bulwark of Order, all of these Avenger Shield things, they're all really nice and synergizing with each other just to give you more damage, more defense. Just a great talent that adds a lot of damage output, which, damage is good. Inmost Light is really slept on, I think, in a lot of situations. Like I see, it's beloved in Mythic Plus, and it really does turn Eye of Tyr from being like a nice little damage cooldown into a pretty huge damage hit in AoE. It's just, it gets slept on, I think, in single target even, which is kind of surprising to me. And then finally, Final Stand here. Just an insane, probably the best defensive cooldown in the entire game. You can't be damaged, and you have threat on everything. What's not to love? If I were to point at any sort of optional things, I would say Spell Warding is maybe the most optional talent here in this whole tree. I just don't really know what I would take instead of it for Mythic Plus. Like, maybe you could drop this point and just take Inspiring Vanguard for a little bit more consistent Grand Crusader procs, a little bit more damage throughout the course of a run, and still be able to progress down the tree. You could take Seal of Reprisal. I see some people take this if they're just trying to parse and raid, or just be kind of lazy with it in Mythic Plus. That's an option. Similarly, you could take Bastion of Light, but I think that's kind of the more high effort and low reward version of it. It's just not really that great of a talent. All right, now let's go to the raid single target setup, because I think that's really the main one that you're going to be using for either 7 or 8 of the fights in raid. Now, you'll note that I haven't taken Cleanse, Toxins, Fist of Justice, Blinding Light, any of these sort of CC talents over here on the left side, because I don't think they're going to be useful most of the time in raid. The bottom of the tree on the left hand is still the same. I have taken Improved Blessing of Protection just for that extra minute of cooldown reduction. May not always be useful, but it can be. Haven't even bothered with Lightforge Blessing. I think all the healing you're going to get out of that is going to be wasted in raid. Taken Seasoned Warhorse just to give a little bit more burst mobility as needed. And then I am assuming you're going to be playing with another protection or another paladin of sub-spec. Maybe it is another protection paladin. Maybe it's a holy or ret, whatever. If it is a ret, then you won't need Auras of Swift Vengeance, and you could take Obduracy maybe, or you could take maybe Recompense. That's an option. I guess no, you would have to take Obduracy to move down the tree. Either way, Auras of Swift Vengeance is not a requirement. Obduracy is fine. It's certainly not that valuable. It's just kind of like if you really need to take an extra point to get down the tree, it's an option. Better to spec into Obduracy than like Fist of Justice on a single target raid boss fight where you don't have anything that you could stun, and this is just literally a wasted point. Over here in the right-hand tree, the setup looks fairly similar. Again, I've taken Blessing of Spell Warding. For some fights, it may not be useful, not required. And again, I think I would recommend either taking Inspiring Vanguard or Seal of Reprisal if you're kind of just looking for like just some passive damage with Seal of Reprisal, or like some passive damage and defense and procs and whatever in Inspiring Vanguard, which I really do think is a little bit of an underrated talent. You could take Bastion of Light if you're looking for like yet another sort of cooldown, you know, gives you some Shield of the Righteous uptime, potentially gives you a free Word of Glory if you really need it. Maybe it could be useful. I think that's pretty niche though. One notable change here is that we're taking Focused Enmity, which was changed in patch, I think 10.0.7, either way, sometime in Season 1, to make it so that when Avenger's Shield strikes a single enemy, it deals 100% extra damage. It does not do the horrible thing that it used to of only hitting one target. It still hits 3 targets even when you're talented into Focused Enmity. That's a great change. This means that if you're fighting some mob who occasionally spawns one ad, which there are a couple of fights in there like this, you're not just losing a bunch of damage there. You're just getting this huge damage increase throughout the rest of the fight. And then you're not talenting into Soaring Shield, which great in AoE, pretty worthless in single target, actually. Similarly, you are running Crusader's Resolve over here. You know, you're not bothering with Strength and Adversity. 2% parry, 4% parry throughout the course of a fight is fine. But for bosses where most of the danger comes from like a big spell hit that they do on you periodically, Crusader's Resolve is just a better option. There are a couple of little talent swaps you can do here. This is sort of a defensively oriented setup. Gift of the Golden Valkyr here being that sort of defensive emergency lifeline. Inmost Light giving you more cooldown reduction, you know, more uptime on Eye of Tyr. 45-second cooldown kind of lines up really nicely with a lot of the boss hits. They do a lot of things on like a 25 to 30-second cooldown. And so having this as a 45-second cooldown, you know, 1 strike goes on you, 1 on the next tank, 1 back on you. And if you're, say, on a minute cooldown out of Eye of Tyr, it might not be up for everyone. Final Stand, also optional. You know, you basically, if you don't need it, you really shouldn't run it. And in that case, I would probably drop these 2 talents for sure, and then potentially Inmost Light if you're trying to go for like a little bit more offensive value, and pick up Moment of Glory. This would give you a pretty good offensive cooldown that also functions as somewhat of a defensive cooldown, but more importantly, actually, it would give you 20% more Avenger Shield damage throughout the whole fight. You know, it's single target, and it does 20% more single target damage, so that's interacting nicely with Focused Enmity. It's interacting nicely with Bulwark of Order to give you a little bit more shielding throughout the fight, and in that case, I might seriously consider running Inspiring Vanguard as well. just to really lock all that in. Although I probably wouldn't give up Bulwark of Righteous Fury to get it, even in single target. 20 to 40% more damage on Shield of the Righteous for the whole fight is actually pretty decent. Again, that's if you're really looking to be damage oriented. I think for a more defensive setup, you would just go with this more standard setup to begin with. But Farron Marcus's Fervor in single target is pretty decent. Now for AoE in Raid, things really don't change that much. I am running the more Mythic Plus oriented situation here of taking Fist of Justice and Blinding Light, because I'm assuming in an AoE setup that you're going to be able to actually CC some of the enemies. If that's not the case, then, you would drop these talents right here. You would pick up whatever you want. Unbound Freedom's nice to have, bit more mobility, maybe Blessing of Sacrifice, which I haven't talented into in this case. Certainly an option. Over here in the right-hand tree, again, taking Spell Warding, assuming that you're going to be using Spell Warding, and, that may not be the case. For Assault of the Zakali, there's not really that much dangerous spell damage. Might actually not take that, and instead take Inspiring Vanguard to get a little bit more consistent AoE damage. And so that would leave your talent setup looking maybe a little bit more like this. Blessing of Spell Warding not taken for that one specific fight. Still getting Gift of the Golden Valkyr for that defensive layer. A lot of damage output out of Bulwark of Righteous Fury and Soaring Shield. A lot of damage and defensive value out of Inmost Light. A lot of defensive value out of Final Stand. I have opted to go with Crusader's Resolve for AoE here. It really depends on how things spawn. I think, you could run either of these. It just really depends on what you're finding to be more dangerous. If it's the packs of ads auto-attacking you, then I would take Strength and Adversity. If it's more of like big boss hits that you're dealing with in the more single target-y moments of the fight, then I would stick with Crusader's Resolve and really try to keep those Avenger Shields slamming into the boss when things get a little heated, so you're getting in a couple more points of damage reduction on the boss at that time. Anyways, I'll link all three of these as like a pinned comment or whatever, and there we go. That's talents for Prot Pally. All right, now let's go over rotational abilities. Judgment is the most important skill in your kit. It's your main holy power generator and your main direct damage dealing skill in single target. Since it only deals single target damage, it is less useful in multi-target situations, especially at the start of pulls when generating threat is more important than anything else. Avenger Shield is the second most important skill in your kit most of the time, but because it no longer generates holy power in Dragonflight, it's less important than Judgment in single target. It's still important for interrupting caster mobs, and it is very important as a multi-target damage skill, so it gets a ton of use, especially at the start of pulls in Mythic Plus or AoE, where you're going to want to open up before you even get into melee range by throwing Avenger Shield out, letting it hit a bunch of mobs and generate threat on them, and then proceeding into the rest of your standard rotation. This is one of the things that I like most about Paladin, and certainly something that I've found in Vault of the Incarnates on some of these Mythic Plus style mob spawns on Broodkeeper or the intermission of Razagath, where you have tons of mobs spawn all on top of you at once. On a Prot Warrior, you can hit Thunderclap. On a Brewmaster Monk, you're rushing Jadewind, Keg Smash, all that. Sometimes you'll have a mob get out, some stragglers will run away, or you just have difficulty doing enough damage to compete with like Evokers or Elemental Shaman who are blasting as hard as they possibly can the moment all the ads spawn. On a Paladin, I never really had that problem. Throw Avenger Shield out, I got all the guys. Blessed Hammer, Hammer of Wrath, and Consecration all occupy secondary spots in your rotation. They're all useful, but they are filler skills to be used after Judgment and Avenger Shield. Blessed Hammer is important for generating holy power to maintain your Shield of the Righteous uptime, and it can also give you Grand Crusader procs, which reset the cooldown of Avenger Shield and reduce the cooldown of Judgment. Hammer of Wrath is the Paladin execute. It deals a pretty good amount of damage, about as much as Judgment, but it doesn't have any of the talent buffs associated with it that Judgment does. It generates a holy power. It's a good skill. You should use it whenever you can, but, after Judgment. It's usable anytime an enemy's below 20% health or whenever you have wings active. So if you're in a situation where you have multiple targets available and you don't have wings active, it is worth swapping to a lower health target if there is one available to throw execute into it, or Hammer of Wrath into it, and generate that holy power when you don't have, a better skill to use on a higher priority target, basically Judgment or Avenger's Shield. As a Paladin, you have two super important defensive buffs you want to maintain at all times while tanking. The first is Shield of the Righteous, and the second is Consecration. Consecration is pretty simple. You cast it, it spawns some AoE damage underneath you, you stand in it, that's it. If it's about to expire or you have to move, or you've used everything else that you would use as a filler skill and you have nothing else left to cast, then you should refresh it. It deals AoE damage, it gives you a lot of damage reduction. It's very basic but very strong. The main thing to emphasize here is not to refresh it too often. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes that Pally players make. You don't really get anything out of refreshing Consecration 5 seconds too early when you're not going to move. It's just a misplay. Shield of the Righteous is your main holy power spender. It deals AoE damage and it's off the global cooldown. You want to maintain Shield of the Righteous as much as you can. I mean, ideally 100% uptime. That's the goal. And that's pretty much it. If you're using Judgment consistently and using your cooldowns well, you should be able to maintain pretty close to 100% uptime on Shield of the Righteous without that much difficulty. Having more haste always helps with that too. I mean, it's a big part of why haste is such a valuable stat for Pally. Never let your holy power go over the cap. It's better to use Shield of the Righteous when you already have like 12 seconds of it active than it is to overcap and waste holy power. That's damage that you're losing. You have several talents that benefit from you spending your holy power as well, cooldown reduction, that sort of thing. So you just generally want to build and spend holy power as quick as you can, pretty much all of the time. There are some cases where you may want to pool a little bit of it here or there, like during an intermission where there's nothing to attack, sure. But otherwise, pretty much build, spend, classic Blizzard gameplay. Your other holy power spender and your only main heal is Word of Glory. It's a heal. You use it when you need healing. You get a free cast every 3 times you use Shield of the Righteous, which means that it's usually available for free when you need it. You should really try to only use it when it's free. You can spend holy power on it. It's not the end of the world, but it is generally better for your Shield of the Righteous uptime to spend the majority of your holy power on Shield of the Righteous. Pretty much all of it. Again, it's way better to Word of Glory if you were definitely going to die if you didn't. But, there is a pretty clear cycle of, like, if you're Word of Glorying because you're at 65, 70% health and letting Shield of the Righteous drop off, now you're going to be bouncing back and forth between full and almost dead over and over again. Your health is going to be a lot more stable if you're just Shield of the Righteousing very consistently and then Word of Glorying as needed when it's free. All right, now I want to go over cooldowns, and this is a very important and pretty long section, I guess. Avenging Wrath is your main offensive cooldown. If you spec into Sentinel, that adds a huge boost to defensive value onto it. You also want to take talents like Sanctified Wrath and Righteous Protector so that it lasts longer, helps you generate more holy power, and gives you cooldown reduction for spending your holy power. This combo of talents will massively increase your uptime. You're going from like 15% uptime all the way up to 40 to 50% uptime. And then if you are running Sentinel, that greatly increases your tankiness while it's active, which with that high of uptime, it's a pretty huge defensive boost overall. That's your main offensive cooldown. You have a few others that sort of serve as multi-purpose cooldowns. Moan of Glory is a talent that I still have mixed feelings about. It grants you 20% more Avenger's Shield damage and 75% Avenger's Shield cooldown reduction. So it's available every 3rd global cooldown. It also makes you shield for 25% of all damage you deal while it's active. This is really good in some raid situations, but you have to give up some other really good stuff in the talent tree to get it, so I'm not a huge fan since the mid-season 1 talent rework. Eye of Tyr is a really good defensive cooldown. It deals a decent chunk of AoE damage and gives you 25% damage reduction against everything that it hits for 9 seconds. It's on a 1-minute cooldown, so it's reasonably short. It's very simple, but pretty good in basically every situation. This all changes a bit if you're using the talent Inmost Light, which I think is an incredible talent, basically a must-have 100% of the time, in my opinion, and something that I think I disagree with a lot of Paladins on when it comes to raid setups. Inmost Light quadruples the damage of Eye of Tyr and reduces its cooldown by 15 seconds. This is insane to me. It becomes an incredible AoE damage cooldown, which makes it an amazing burst threat tool at the start of Mythic Plus pulls or when ads spawn in AoE fights. It's also a really strong defensive cooldown that becomes available 25% more often, which is great. I think it's a must-have bonus for an already powerful talent, unless you are facing content that is completely non-threatening from a defensive perspective. I would say if you have zero fear of dying from what you're tanking, then this probably isn't worth running. Otherwise, it is. Divine Toll is an AoE burst damage skill that's great for picking up threat at the start of pulls or for interrupting packs of casters. It's not really very complicated. It basically is just 5 Avenger Shields at once, except they all generate holy power each, which is really helpful at the start of pulls. It's not as useful in single target as it only casts 1 Avenger Shield and generates 1 holy power, and that's kind of weak for a 1-minute cooldown, but it is still a button you can press after you've used Judgment and, got your opening burst going. It's still a damage cooldown to use even in single target. Not terrible, and it does synergize with all of the talents that synergize with Avenger's Shield, so there's still some value there, even in pure single target. Bastion of Light is very simple. It grants you 3 free Shield of the Righteous or Word of Glory casts. This is mainly useful for getting a quick bunch of Shield of the Righteous casts off at the start of a pull. That's really good. It helps a lot with stabilizing your defense at the start of a pull, and that has traditionally been a pretty serious pain point for Pallies. Alright, now let's talk about the defensive cooldowns, and by that I really mean the purely defensive cooldowns. Ardent Defender is your first lifeline in terms of defensive cooldowns. It's a relatively short cooldown, around 60 seconds with Resolute Defender in the class tree. It's a relatively minor amount of base damage reduction, only 20%, but it gives you an active cheat death effect, which is incredibly strong for dealing with big boss abilities. Just a really strong defensive cooldown, one of the best. You have Guardian of Ancient Kings as well, which is a very straightforward shield wall. You just use it to mitigate huge chunks of damage. The base cooldown is 5 minutes, but thanks to Righteous Protector, even post-nerf, the average cooldown is more like 3.5 minutes. Not that bad. You also have Blessing of Sacrifice, which is an external cooldown you can use on other players, and Blessing of Protection, which you can use to clear some physical debuffs from yourself or other players, or protect again, yourself or other players, from all physical damage. It will set your threat to 0 while it's active, so you don't want to use it on yourself while you're tanking most of the time. I'll go over that a bit more in a second. You also have Blessing of Spell Wording available, which makes the target immune to spell damage and prevents magic effects from being applied to the target. Unlike Blessing of Protection, it cannot be used to clear magic debuffs that are already on the target. That's basically always the case. It has to be precast to immune the initial application of the debuff. It's kind of like Anti-Magic Shell for a DK. That being said, it's insanely strong in a ton of situations. Bop and Spell Wording do share a cooldown. They're 2 of the most powerful external cooldowns in the game. You also have Lay on Hands, which is super self-explanatory. It's a full health heal. You can use it on yourself or other players. That's pretty much it. 6-minute-ish cooldown, pretty long. And finally, Divine Shield. With Resolute Defender, it's a 2.5-minute cooldown. It basically just functions like a combination of Blessing of Protection and Spell Wording at the same time. You can use it to remove some debuffs, but not all of them. You can use it in the middle of a boss cast to immune the damage and the debuffs, although some abilities will penetrate immunities. You can use Divine Shield and then cast Taunt, or Hand of Reckoning, to force mobs to attack you for the next 3 seconds, but other than that, you will not be able to hold threat while Divine Shield is active. The main use for Divine Shield and Blessing of Protection for me has historically been to clear debuffs, usually a stacking bleed effect. To do that, it's really important to have a Cancel Aura macro and have that bound somewhere that you can't accidentally hit it. It basically needs to look like /Cancel Aura Blessing of Protection, and then on the next line, /Cancel Aura Divine Shield. You want both of these in the same macro, that way you can use either of them to clear a debuff, then quickly remove them without letting anyone else get auto-attacked. But there's also Final Stand. Final Stand makes your Divine Shield continuously AoE taunt everything nearby. This is an insanely powerful defensive cooldown. You're effectively immune to damage and debuffs for a full 8 seconds, but you're also able to hold threat the entire time and only on a 2.5-minute cooldown. This is insane. Again, there are some effects that can penetrate immunities, so it's not 100% foolproof, but it is powerful, easy to use, and super reliable. Now let's talk about how to pull on a Protection Paladin. This is something I very specifically wanted to go over with respect to Mythic Plus because I know that pulling packs of mobs in dungeons can be kind of challenging for new players, so here we are. On a Paladin, it's pretty simple. You basically open by throwing an Avenger Shield to establish AoE threat. Then depending on your cooldowns, things can kind of branch out from there. Your main goals are to get Shield of the Righteous active and Consecration down as quickly as you can. If you have Avenging Wrath, or I guess Sentinel, probably in a Mythic Plus situation, if you have that available, I like to pop Sentinel, throw Judgment again before I've even gotten into melee range. We're talking Avenger Shield, and then Wings and Judgment right after that. Then I like to throw a Hammer of Wrath just to get to 3 Holy Power, hit Shield of the Righteous, and then Divine Toll to get 5 Holy Power, but not have wasted any, and Shield of the Righteous again, and then proceed into my standard rotation from there. Get Consecration up, Judgment some more, Hammer of Wrath, Avenging Wrath, or Avenger Shield whenever it resets, all of that good stuff. You can use Eye of Tyr as well as a really powerful AoE damage threat tool and defensive cooldown. That's a really good option for securing threat early in a pull as well if you're having any struggles at all. It also will give you an extra layer of tankiness, which is nice. In terms of stats, Pallies want to gem and enchant for haste, and then mastery is your second best secondary stat due to how it increases your block chance, which also works against auto attacks, well, obviously, but then also spell damage and spell damage over time thanks to Holy Shield and just, the way your mastery is designed. Strength is very valuable, so whenever possible, you mainly just want to maximize your item level. That really is the golden rule of gearing up, with the exception of trinkets, which there are some that are better than others. Pretty much just item level is king most of the time. I probably should say some sort of concluding statement here in the outro rather than just bye. I really like Protection Paladin. I hope this helps you enjoy playing it more, learn something, and yeah, it's just a really good tank. Really fun too. I mean, that's the one thing I keep coming back to whenever I want to complain about it being overpowered or whatever. It definitely is. It's also incredibly fun to play, so you really can't be mad at it. All right, that is it. Thanks for watching. Bye.